Okay, so I am here with a group of friends. It's my very first hangout on air, and what we're talking about tonight is really just how we feel about technology and how it affects our families today. And I'm going to ask everybody to just introduce themselves, starting from the front of the room up there at Anthony.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Park, and I am a wealth manager for a boutique firm by day, and by night I'm a technology user like most of you. My girlfriend and I, this is a very interesting topic for me because my girlfriend and I, we've been together 16 years and we're strongly considering having children. And I am a little bit nervous about how technology is going to impact that and what it's going to mean for kids as time rolls on. So,
Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Enlow. I'm a photographer. I have two sons, 7 and 4, and obviously I'm a technology user as well. My wife and I, we've both taken online college credits, and let me see what else. Google, Twitter. My 7-year-old and my 4-year-old both have DSs. My 7-year-old's he doesn't know it, and it's capable of connecting to our home network. But like I said, he doesn't know it yet. It also takes pictures. He's starting to use the computer, and my 4-year-old wants his DS for himself. He wants his 7-year-old brother's DS. So, it's coming into play already at such a young age of 4.
I feel you on that one. Fiona?
Okay, hi, my name is Fiona. I have a 11-year-old daughter. I'm a single parent, and she's quite heavily into technology. She's got an iPod Touch that she'll collect onto any network that she can, basically. And as her dad is not very technologically aware, and so I'm really trying to do the work for two. And I just want to know the perspective, because I'd say out here in Switzerland we're probably way behind you guys. So I'm just wanting to have a look what's going on out there and what people think.
Very cool. Joe?
My name is Joe Bolin. I'm an unemployed Linux systems engineer. I used to write for Linux.com. I actually wrote an article. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I actually wrote an article about Linux, internet filtering for parents using Linux and inexpensive hardware a few years ago. The interesting thing about that was that it actually got used by several community centers to set up cheap, inexpensive filtering for their, children's community centers. So I have a lot of interest in this.
Very cool. And Mike?
Mike Jansen. I'm a computer programmer. Got 5 kids. They're a little bit older, 13, 15, 16, 18, and 20. So we've been through some of this and kind of seen the good and the bad. So still have the younger ones to get through. So just interested in talking with other parents.
And since you have the older ones too, I'm very interested in kind of the what's worked and what hasn't worked perspective.
Right. And I just asked my 18-year-old tonight, because she's actually around here somewhere. I said, you can stop in and be honest with everybody. So
yeah, that's definitely a good perspective. Go ahead.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
And Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Tyler. I am also a photographer. I have one 3-year-old daughter. She's really not into the tech stuff yet, thankfully. So our extent with the tech side of things is just a little child's leapfrog imitation iPad thing that we got her for Christmas, and she has absolutely no interest whatsoever in it. So I'm still not quite into the tech side yet with her, but we're getting there. I know it's coming eventually, so that's it.
Well, for everyone else who doesn't know me, I'm Stephanie, and I am a single parent as well. And my boys are almost 6, like we're just a couple weeks away, and 9. And I remember when they were younger, they weren't interested at all in things like the little leapfrog situation. But really, where this interest came from with me is that my mother was actually, for a period of time, had a teenage relative living with her, and I was watching her struggle with how to raise her and cope, and how it affected like the whole family dynamic. Things are just really different now, the situations they're facing. And I just thought, wow, this is what's coming for me, and I better educate myself. And so I'm really interested in hearing from the parents that have been through it, and I'm also really interested in hearing from the parents that haven't gone through it yet and perhaps have some sort of perspective, like you get the been there, done that, like cynicism, and then you get the naive, well, this is like my hope. And then I also want to hear kind of, for me, what I'm also interested in is what's worked, what they've liked, how they've used technology to make the family dynamic better, the things that have, like it's not just that I'm afraid of this, how am I going to deal with it, but also how has it helped? Like, I'm excited about e-readers at school and the fact that the books are all available online. So I'm kind of interested in a lot of topics, and they don't all have to be covered in one evening. But I guess my first kind of question for people would be, what are your largest concerns? What are your biggest worries? What are you the most interested in?
I can tell you what my worries were when the kids were younger. I mean, especially because a lot of it was newer. I mean, to me, I felt like, access to the internet was like them being able to walk down, a big city street in the middle of the night with, who knows what they'd encounter. And just, without trying to be paranoid, just being realistic about everything that they could run into. And then that was, when they were smaller, that was definitely, I think my biggest concern was both the type of content and stuff they'd run into and the people. People pretending to be 8-year-old kids, and things that were just not, very real dangers that small kids who didn't know any better could run into. So
I think one of the things that and I can kind of relate to that too, because I've been an internet user before it was called the internet. I was on AOL and I saw all the creepers and the really, really bad creepers. The bad stuff, the dark side of the internet, and it was like, oh, whoa, I don't want my kids to do this, because if I can just stumble into it, so can they. And that was one of the premises for me writing that article that I did for Linux.com years ago. But there are tools, and people will jump up and down and raise the censorship flag and go, oh, you shouldn't censor your kids or whatever. But the thing is, like, it's just like you putting a parental lock on your satellite TV or your cable TV. It's the same thing. You don't want your younger kids watching R-rated or in some cases PG-13 movies. You don't want them to be able to go to certain websites. And the only way to do that is to take charge. And a lot of parents get lazy. Kids get bought computers and they just plug them into the internet. And a lot of parents will take the initiative and go, well, you've got to use the computer in the family room where I can see you, what you're doing. And that works okay, but what happens when mom and dad's not home? So that was kind of the premise for me writing the article of doing, I'm not trying to fight it because it's years old. But basically, you set up a transparent proxy in your home with cheap hardware, and you basically filter what your kids can and can't see. You can bypass it because you know a certain password, but a lot of parents don't want to go through that trouble. It's too much trouble. It's not as easy on the internet as it is like with your cable TV.
See, like, for me, I grew up in a fairly conservative household in that I didn't watch television that my parents weren't watching with me. And so I still have this attitude of I'm not going to, my children will not consume internet that I'm not a part of. So my particular stance is that they're not on the internet that's unsupervised. They're still fairly young. I think it'll be different in the teen years. I'm going to have to kind of maybe really reevaluate my thought process. So at the moment, I'm less concerned about content, and I'm more concerned about teaching them how to filter themselves.
Right.
But I'm curious, Mike, what wound up being your larger problems? What wound up being the issues that were kind of the most trouble in your household?
Trouble? I don't think we ended up with a lot of trouble in the long run. I mean, I was really careful when the kids were younger, and with my older son, I was probably careful too long. And I think if he were here, my 20-year-old, he'd agree with that. That I was probably too restrictive too long with him. But I wish my 18-year-old was in here. She said, because I asked her tonight, I said, hey, come in and talk about what was good and bad and, how it all worked out. And she's like, well, I didn't have any problems. I never saw the bad side of the internet. And she said, I liked that. And she's on Facebook and stuff all the time now. And, she does whatever. So the big thing was, and it sounds like it's kind of what you're doing, is the combination of you're protecting them by, hey, internet time is with me. So that is, you are filtering content that way. In that sense, you are being careful about it. And then the whole educating them and just being very frank with them. I didn't pull any punches about, the type of people that are out there. And not to scare them, but to say, you know what? You don't give out personal information, and here's why. There's people that will hurt you. And you just got to be wise about it. So just being frank with them. And, the main problems were we used the filtering just that comes with Internet Explorer. And earlier on, the kids weren't smart enough to just download Firefox or Chrome and get around it. So that worked. But they were always upset. The biggest problems was dealing with the fact that, hey, stuff's getting blocked all the time, and sometimes things were getting blocked that didn't need to be blocked, and the filter made it run slower. So they were that was the biggest issue, was the contention, and where I just said, well, it's either that or you don't use the computer.
Now, at what age did you allow your children to have a phone, and when did they start using something like a smartphone? And Fiona, is cell phone use among children common in Switzerland? Because it is here.
Extremely common. Extremely common. Everybody in my daughter's class has a cell phone.
Are they smartphones or are they regular phones?
Some have smartphones, some have regular phones. But the interesting thing is, a friend of mine actually gave my daughter a phone because she was having issues connecting with me when she was with her dad. And so a friend of mine who's one of my daughter's confidants actually said, oh, look, here you go, take this phone because, I know your mom has issues with giving you a phone, but, it's coming from me, so it's okay. And the weird thing is she hardly uses her phone at all now. And now that she's been given an iPod Touch, she uses her Touch a lot, and she doesn't use her phone that much. And it's really weird. So when I want to get hold of her, I send her a message on the iPod Touch, an iMessage, and the phone is mostly off, which is weird.
That is weird.
And I've noticed most of her friends, they would rather chat on their phones than actually use voice.
Now, do you find that there's less... I've heard complaints, especially from parents of like the 16 to 18-year-old set that were maybe less prepared for kind of like what was coming in with this, where like they're having trouble with their kids making eye contact, and that there's a whole different way of communicating, and that they're losing some of their interpersonal skills. And I think Mike with the older kids would probably be a good person to weigh in, but also at 11, do you see that there's problems with that happening? Like, do you see that coming, or is it maybe not so much an issue?
I have a question about that, actually, because I mean, I've seen personally when I was coaching speech and debate at a local high school that a lot of the 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds with the smartphones were frankly, looking at all sorts of, pornography and stuff in the middle of, after-school extracurricular activity hours, right? So I don't know anything about the content filtering that would happen, that should happen with one of these. It's a lot easier with the internet as a whole. And how do you feel? How do you guys feel about that? Because I mean, I've had to confiscate a lot of smartphones from a lot of kids because I am trying to coach them debate, and instead, what are they doing? They're doing something completely different. Does anyone want to weigh in on that? Because this is the thing that scares me the most, actually.
Yeah.
I agree with you about the smartphones because, I mean, the number of kids who video each other, and in my school they're supposed to not have their phones on during school time, but they all do.
Right.
Well, it was even that way when I was in high school. I mean, I'm 23. I'm probably the youngest of the bunch. I don't have kids.
And
I saw
school.
We were talking about cell phones for younger people, and it's getting. I mean, I've sold kids for phones because I work in electronics to people who are 10 and 11 now that have Evos and iPhones and stuff now. So
it's insane. To me, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard.
I saw a high school, and I can't remember where I saw it, but I saw a high school that actually does like lock boxes, similar to the lock boxes where like when a cop goes into impound or whatever, he has to check in his gun.
Right.
So they put in a lock box, and he pulls out the key, and it's the key to that box, and that's where his gun stays. They do the same thing with cell phones. When you walk into the class, there's a lock box on the wall. Like 30 of them. Right. Take the key out. They put their phone in. Keep the key. They have the key. And then when they leave, they get their phone again.
Genius.
The phone stays there. And it absolutely, it's simple genius.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the way it should be. I mean, doesn't anybody remember a time when the guy talking at the top of the room or the gal talking at the top of the room was the teacher, and the children were supposed to be obeying? Does anybody remember that?
Right.
I do.
I do.
The thing that sort of strikes me as odd, and I know I don't personally have any children, but to give you guys some more perspective, I mean, I've coached martial arts far longer than I care to actually say on camera. I think I'm a lot older than I actually look. And so I've dealt with parents who are frustrated with kids. I've dealt with kids myself, and I've been frustrated by them. And I've also coached high school speech and debate, which I think is the worst, but I think all of the fears that parents deal with need to be dealt with earlier, as early as 5 and 6, and probably not much earlier than that, frankly, because it doesn't really matter, right? But your 10-year-old has nothing important to say such that they need a smartphone, right? Nothing. I mean, unless it's an absolute emergency and they're getting kidnapped and you need GPS capability, that child needs to go like this and read a book, okay? Right. That's the reality of it. So I think David Copperfield had some interesting perspectives. There's a thing where he put his camera on a rotating rig, and then he puts the curtain over the camera, and then all of a sudden the plane disappears, right? Well, all they did was tilt the camera so that, and then give the time for the plane to move, because they actually taxied the plane out of the way, and then voila, they make the camera disappear. I think that's what you have to do with children. You just sort of never tell them that the internet is out there. In that manner until they are old, they will discover it on their own. Trying to get a 16, 17-year-old boy not to discover the dark side of the internet is futile. But by the time they are 16 or 17...
I think this is a little naive in that my 9-year-old, at this point in time, all of his school books are available online. And he is told by his teachers to check their website for homework. So at 9... he wanted to join a Relay for Life team that the school was putting on, and I said, well, we'll have to look up where it is. He goes, oh, that's right, I can just go to Google and look up Relay for Life, and then I can find our team, and then I can find out. So he knew all of this at 9.
No, well, and I understand that they know.
So, I mean, yes, you can get, but you have to get to that point where, and he's been asking us for a Kindle Fire, and I'm just kind of like, no, you can't. Like, he was given a cell phone. His father gave him a cell phone for like his 8th birthday, and I did not really agree with it, but I didn't disagree. I wasn't like, no, he shouldn't have that. Don't do it. I just kind of said, well, I wouldn't give him one now, but I'm not going to be upset with you if you do. And it was just a little.
Right.
It wasn't a smartphone. It was just a little, hey, you can chit chat kind of thing, or talk. And it worked out really well because he actually got on the wrong bus the first day of school and wound up across town, and we were able to get a hold of him. And I apologized to his father because I was like, okay, that wound up being really useful. But right now,
yeah, it's totally useful. It's a tether. That phone is a leash. Make no mistake about it.
So there have been times where sometimes, like, I'm afraid of the advancing technology, but it has really actually helped our family. Now, at this point in time, he doesn't tend to keep it charged, and I don't know where it is. I think it's at his dad's house somewhere. But he has asked for things like, and he doesn't say it to me, maybe just because he knows where my mentality's at, but his dad said he's asked about a Facebook account, and he goes to a fairly affluent school, so there are kids that have more things, and I kind of feel like I'm kind of along the lines of, if you don't really talk about some of it too much, then you don't have to point it out to them.
Right.
But it turned out he was more aware of Facebook than I thought he was.
Well, sure, they're going to be aware, but I think the number one key is to flip their vision around by keeping them busy with stuff that requires the type of internet, because there's only 24 hours in a day, right? So these kids need to be, and their minds need to be pumped and dumped with so much information anyway, right? So the idea is, between the filtering and, the hardware that you use, the software that you use to make sure that these children can't go there, they're going to get around it eventually anyway as they get older, but in the meantime, between, say, 10 and 17, those prime years, right, you just got to get as much information into them as you can. So that means if they're busy enough and they're working hard enough, chances are when they do encounter the occasional negative aspect of the internet, it's going to be like out of sight, out of mind. I mean, they'll probably ask you about it. They'll be like, well, that's weird or whatever, but the hope is that you keep them occupied and engaged, and you focus their engagement away from Facebook so that they don't need it as much or want it as much because they're too busy with school projects that require their time.
And I think depending on your circumstance, you can keep kids away from stuff. And honestly, I think there's benefit in keeping your kids away from that stuff as long as they can. But the reality is if your kids go to school, you've got to be more active in keeping them very aware of stuff without getting into the details. It takes kind of learning how to discuss dangers and things without creating a curiosity that's naturally going to be there anyways. But you just have to be, you really have to take time to work through them what the real dangers are and what's wise and what's not, because kids are going to get, if the kids are not with you all the time, they are going to get on the computer, and they're going to have friends who maybe aren't being taught the same things that they're being taught at home, and their friends are going to get them into stuff. It's reality, and you have to. Just so you know, our kids were homeschooled earlier on, and so we had actually an opportunity to keep them away from that stuff earlier on. But not everybody wants to have that opportunity or has that opportunity. So you've got And that's going to be most people. And so you have to be in touch with your kids.
Right, but think about it for a minute, right? They're in school for 6, 7 hours a day, hopefully, in your state. In my state, it's as low as 5 hours a day, which is unfortunate in and of itself, right? But then they have after-school activities, and so people can talk about Facebook all they want, and maybe on the few microseconds that they have their phone on in between class, they can access Facebook and do a lot of damage or whatever. But all told, between having 1 or 2 after-school activities and then homework, there's not a lot of time for them to do much Facebooking or G+ing. If you really schedule it right and work that stuff out. And that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, well, I'm going to play the pessimist here and say, where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, and of course, I mean, any grown man in here, you don't have to say this, but if you're a grown man in this chat room, you know darn well the first time you saw what you weren't supposed to see. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm just going to leave it at that. And it was a hell of a lot younger than the kids we're discussing now.
Right.
So. And we didn't die. We didn't change. We didn't turn into some, evil.
There was a difference in availability, though. I think, a preteen that finds, a stash somewhere is different than, the unlimited access of the internet.
Well, I don't really. I'm going to have to disagree with you.
Yeah.
I was probably 12. I'm going to put this out there. I was probably 12 when I stumbled across. And when I say stumbled across, I went looking for it. My dad's stack of, which was about this high, of, Hustler and Penthouse and all those magazines. And we got caught eventually, but we found it and we were intrigued. We liked it. And at the same time, when I was married, my previous marriage, my stepsons were 15 and 16, I think, at the time. And I found some hidden porn files that they had saved on the hard drive. They thought they'd hidden them. This is what you get for having a stepdad that's a systems engineer. But, so I found it and I caught them and called them out on them, just like I got called out on. And, of course, they denied it, just like I did.
Didn't you feel hypocritical about that, though?
I did, honestly. And, in fact, me and my wife talked about this. It's like, we were doing the same thing. I said, yeah, but we got to set the boundaries. And that's the whole thing. You want to set the rules in the house as a parent. You got to set the guidelines.
You're right about that, because, it's one thing to give them unlimited, ever-flowing access to this stuff, and okay, we know you're going to do it, but by all means, keep it down to a sane minimum. In other words, if you stumbled upon it or have a couple of them, that's one thing.
Well, it's like what we told them, and me and my wife talked about it. What we wound up doing was we basically locked their accounts for a certain amount of time, and once they came back onto it, it actually the internet had a transparent proxy attached to it. They didn't know about it, but it had a proxy. So they can get onto the porn sites. It's like, okay, we know you're going to look at this. You're 15, 16. We didn't tell them this, but it's like, but we're not going to let you. We're not going to provide this information for you in the house. It's kind of hypocritical, but at the same time, as a parent, you still want to set those boundaries.
Oh, yeah. No, there's no question.
So there were a couple things that I've thought about, one of them being when my parents had this teenage relative living with them, one of the things that happened to her, it was one of her friends, was that her friend, another teenage boy sent her friend an erotic picture of himself. And then, of course, she showed it to my cousin and all these other things. And so there was this concern. My parents were like, but if this got forwarded to her, if her friend was like, oh my gosh, you have to see this, let me forward this on to you, because even your non-smartphones can get a picture. She's now in possession of child porn. And she's now in a situation where she can be prosecuted and labeled a sex offender, and a 13, 14, 15-year-old simply cannot understand the long-term consequences. And so I think this is kind of what my biggest fear is that there's you can talk about things and you can really be there for them and you can monitor, but it's just so hard for them to really understand how permanent it is. When I was 15, I could do things and I could mess up royally and I could make huge mistakes, and there was never anything permanent to chase me down my life. And
Right.
I think that's what scares me, is just how permanent everything is, that when it's there, it's there.
And your life... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
And that's why you have to be so frank with them about just that, is how quickly things can be damaged. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard. It's going to be hard for kids to comprehend, but you've got to. I mean, if looking back of the things that I am happy about and the things that I regret how I handled them, I'm glad that I was firm and frequent about the dangers of the internet with my kids, and I would explain every situation that would come up. I would explain to them, hey, look, this is how this could turn bad very quickly. And I mean, the kids got sick of it. They got sick of hearing it, but they didn't get it for a while, and now they're, to some degree, I think, they're understanding that, and I see that in their interactions. I mean, they'll be careful about stuff. There's very rarely I will say something about what I see them posting on Facebook, and they're a lot more careful. I mean, my oldest son wasn't, but I think part of that was because I was naive with him, I know, and I was too strict too long, and that combination of being naive and too strict too long, I think, it made him ignore what I was saying.
Well, isn't that some of the fear with Facebook timelines too?
Yeah, you kind of have to have that balance between the strictness and holding down the fort on the guidelines and realizing that it's going to happen. Now, I posted in the chat, I did make a post on Google+, kind of regarding this conversation earlier about cell phones in classrooms. So if you guys want to comment or follow it, there's the link. But going back to what you were saying, it's a parent, it's a fine line. You never know if you're doing too much or too little, and you just got to just do your best, and it's a crapshoot at any rate. I mean, it really is. It's really a crapshoot.
Yeah.
You can do your best, and they can still turn out like crap, or you can do your worst, and they can still turn out just wonderful. So all you can do is just hope for the best.
Well, each child is unique in what they can handle, and I had put in a side chat. I'm going to just go ahead. I know this is kind of a public broadcast, but I had my son tell me, "Oh, mommy, I know I know what a blowjob is," and I was just kind of aghast at this conversation. And he had waited a couple days until he was back with me to talk about it. So, on one hand, I felt really, really awesome that he felt like he could talk to me and that he wanted to have this conversation with me. And I've consistently told him, if there's anything that makes you uncomfortable, if there's anything that you feel like you need to talk about, I'm your mom. That's what I'm here for. I'm supposed to help you with these things. That's my job. So please come talk to me. And I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
And that's actually a better approach to doing it, because I tell you, in my own childhood, I swear to God, I was in Little League. And one of the assistant coaches told us this dirty joke. And I come home at 12 years old, Mom, I've got a joke to tell you. I told her this dirty joke, and she sits there and she laughs at it. She goes, you know what, when your father comes home, you need to tell him that joke. So I walk out all proud as a bee, and she's setting me up. She's trolling me. She sets me up, and I walk out on the front porch, and I'm telling my dad this joke, and he walks in the house, comes out with a bar of soap, wet. I get my mouth washed out. Got punished. The assistant coach got fired. It was just an ugly scene. But, from that point forward, I never felt comfortable talking to my parents about certain things. Okay, so I hid them. Right.
Yeah, and that's worse, right?
So that is much worse. I mean, it's much better that, they would have been like, okay, that's a funny joke, but it's a little inappropriate for you to be telling you. And explain it to me instead of she trolled me. But, looking back on it now, it's funny, but, looking as a childhood, it's like, I kind of wish my parents would have done this, but, they're my parents. I love them. I'm always going to love them.
Well, it's a different time, too.
Right,
like we talk about all of this a lot more now than we did when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, like, I just basically said this is something that is an intimate thing between two adults. And he asked me if it was inappropriate, and I said, it's inappropriate for you at this age. It's inappropriate for a child.
And did he come back with the why? Why is it inappropriate?
No, he actually said, no, okay. And we've had discussions about how some things are adult behaviors and that these are things that you kind of grow into, and there are...
And that couldn't have been the first time you had a discussion with him about something that was appropriate for you or appropriate in circumstance A, but not appropriate in circumstance B. Right. I think the kids have a tendency to process a lot better than we give them credit for. I'm not saying that everything gets full disclosure, but we tend to taint their perceptions when we stutter and stumble with trying to explain something as opposed to coming back and giving it to them straight when we can.
Right, and kids want to, that's kind of a funny thing. It's like when my daughter was 2 years old, why is the sky blue? I gave her the whole scientific explanation. She totally understood it and moved on. This is why the sun comes through and there's water in the atmosphere and blah, 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 and the different layers of the atmosphere, and that's why the sky is blue. And she was like, oh, okay. Could she repeat it? Could she regurgitate it? No, she couldn't, but she understood it. And I think we should give children a little more credit, a lot more credit, actually, than we do, because they're sponges.
Yeah, adults...
They absolutely absorb a lot more things. They understand things.
Adults, hear me on this. Okay, just because adults have a greater knowledge base as a function of their age, believe me when I say that children are smarter than you. Their minds are more facile than yours. They're more flexible than yours. They move faster than yours. I mean, and when a child looks at an adult, what they see is somebody retarded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's the God's honest truth. Because I remember looking at adults thinking, this guy, he may know more than me, but his brain moves at like 8-bit. Okay? This guy is an idiot, right? And now that I used to coach debate, I look at these kids, and these kids look at me the same way, and they're right. They are always going to be right. They are smarter than you. Be honest, but at the right time. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the key, is being honest.
And
a lot of times
I base that on my experience, okay? Not so much by lying overtly, but just by focusing. It's almost a lie by omission. You just have to focus them in areas of their life where their life is moving at a quick enough pace where they don't care about this crap. That's the best you can hope for.
Right, and it's kind of the thing where you cover up and you go, oh, that's for adults, and that just makes them more curious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, it does. They're curious creatures. I mean, we're all curious by nature. I still haven't grown up. I'm still curious. But when you tell somebody that it's human nature, when you tell somebody, no, you don't need to be bothered with this, that actually makes them more curious about it. Whereas if you're just more upfront about it and go, boom, 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 here it is, and you have to choose your words, obviously, but if you're more upfront with kids and children, then it kind of takes that glamour aspect away from the subject.
I think it also helps build your respect level with them, and that this isn't someone who's just brushing me off, and
right, because they do pick up on that.
Yeah, and Anthony, I love getting the perspective of somebody who deals with children that isn't a parent, because as parents we get very biased because we just know our children, and it's been like I've just always been the kind of parent, like when they were in preschool, that I would come back to the preschool teachers and say, well, what is your opinion? You deal with all 4-year-olds. I'm just dealing with my kid, you know, is this normal? Is this not normal? Should I be alarmed? And it was really helpful for me. I'm the oldest in my family, and I was like the first one to have kids, and I didn't have any other experience with other kids. I didn't have a comparison. I didn't have a way of knowing what to expect. And so I always value the opinion of, that's why I was trying to say, like, educators, mentors, coaches, anybody who deals with children. It doesn't have to just be parents, because it's good to kind of get that unbiased, well, this is what my kid does, so this is the way it has to be perspective.
Well, you know, and thank you. I mean, thank you for you guys for making me feel welcome. I mean, it's very easy for parents to say, well, you don't know what the bleep you're talking about because you don't have any kids, you've never been through this. But the reality is I've been through it hundreds of times. They just weren't mine, right? And I'm thankful for that because I didn't like any of them. Okay, because the kids are a bunch of brats, right? No, but seriously, I mean, I'm scared to death to have kids. I'm not gonna lie, because of what's going on out there. I remember my mother's, sort of birds and the bees story with me. This is the God's honest truth. She got a willow switch. I was 14. She walked up to me and she just cracked me in the butt and she says, "Don't get anybody pregnant," and that was it. Okay, and that was just she didn't at all color my perception about what sex was or what she thought sex should be. She just said, look, there's a consequence for the doing, right? And the consequence is you might have children. And here I am 16 years into a relationship, and I still haven't had any kids. So I guess it worked, right?
It sunk in, yeah.
The impression was to me was until you have children, and she, later on that night, she came up to me and she goes, you know you're not well off. We're a poor, family, right? And having kids is hard when you're poor. It's hard when you're rich, but it's certainly harder when you're poor, right? So don't even think about bringing a child into this world until you're ready. I mean, financially, we are capable now, but I don't know that I want to bring one in until I'm, fairly well off. Because somebody mentioned, like Stephanie mentioned, about what happens when your kid comes home and on their smartphone they've got an erotic picture of another kid. I don't want that to happen. I would lose my mind. Can you imagine somebody suing me because of something like that, or the Fed coming in? I mean, the thing about social media is that it's permanent. Kids and that's the thing kids don't understand, is that everything they do has a permanence to it now, whereas when we were all growing up and you're out in the back 40 somewhere, with a member of the opposite sex and you're 14, like nothing bad happened to you except for a whooping, right? Nothing bad happened to you. That's the worst that would have happened to you, okay? And maybe you wouldn't see that girl again or whatever. I mean, when your parents found out. That's it. Nowadays, people go to jail. That's the reality of people, right? And it scares me to death that we've taken natural experiences away from children, and what we've done is we've given them this two-dimensional, typed proximity of it. And now we're held responsible by it. Just like the phone is a leash for a parent to a child, social media is society's leash upon us, right? And everything we say and do is on it. So by all means, be careful, be aware. Don't be afraid to use the stick. Your kids are bad. That's all I got to say, really.
I have just discovered the comment section on my YouTube channel, and I was just reviewing them. So since it's my first one, I'm kind of not used to going through all of this, and so forgive me if I zoned out there for a moment. I just realized I had quite a few comments that I wasn't noticing. So carry on.
Well, the other thing I wanted to say is that sometimes I wonder if parents have a plan. Like, companies have a 5-year plan for acquiring technology. I know that as a former senior finance analyst, right? And they phase technology in and out as time goes on, right? But I noticed the vast majority of parents do not really seem to have a plan. And
that would be true.
There's nothing more important. I mean, there's nothing that happens in a company that's as important. And I can tell you, I was a senior finance analyst at Intel, Informatica, Silicon Graphics, whatever. I worked at a lot of these companies, and I worked on a lot of important projects. But there's nothing as important as parenting your child, right? We can all agree, right? You know, but you go to work and participate in these plans and think them normal, and when you come home, the absence of that plan is probably the reason parents have problems. I mean, they're going to have problems anyway.
What do you mean by plan? What do you mean by plan? Can you be specific?
Well, sure. I mean, at least I'll try. I mean, you have to look forward and sort of guess at what technology is going to be there, and you have to decide early on what you're going to allow your child to use, right? And how you're going to, you know, like Joe was talking about having some sort of, you know, proxy device that allowed them to only use the internet in a certain way and visit certain sites, right? So if you have to be really restrictive about it and say, well, you can use, you know, these educational sites like Khan Academy, or, you know, you can have YouTube but only like 1 hour a day unless it's educational YouTube or whatever, right? I mean, if you don't have a plan for how you approach your, you know, your child's internet usage, you'll be disappointed.
Well, I think that's a policy, not a plan, right? I mean, a plan involves doing things over time, and not to be semantic, but one of the things I've found as a parent over time is plans are kind of sort of worthless. I mean, you have to deal with whatever the circumstance is. I mean, today it may be internet access. Tomorrow it may be issues in the school. I mean, it's
right. But do you approach your child's education forward, or do you just allow the school system, for example, to tell you what they're going to be teaching your child?
I allow the school system to tell me what they're going to be teaching my child, and I either find it acceptable or I don't. And so far, I haven't found it unacceptable.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't. I don't know that I could do that. I think maybe, and this is the part where I might be treading into naive territory, quite frankly. But I will be homeschooling my children for the foreseeable future, so that I have, you know, more control of their time. I live in Arizona. We have some of the worst education in the nation, right? And having volunteered my time as a coach, I'm like, there's no way I would subject my child to being with other children in this environment. There's just no way.
I don't have a problem with the public school system, but I do think that parents should be aware of what their children are reading. Some of the readings that came home, I was kind of like, wow, these have a really big bias, or they were just grossly inaccurate. And I just couldn't believe what was coming home from like just the history and the reality. I'm like, this just isn't truth. And so I think it's good as a parent to identify the values that you have for your child and the values that you have for your family, and to check in periodically and make sure that you can do some damage control, because these school books are written with a bias, and it may be one that you agree with or one you don't agree with, but you have to be aware that they're there, and you have to know what's important for you as a family. So I couldn't believe it was just a complete falsehood. I was like, this is just a lie. This isn't how it went down. This is just wrong. And it was what my child was reading as like gospel truth because the teacher told him this was it. So, and I have friends who are teachers and educators, and they go through the same process when they're trying to pick books. They have to work within a certain approved list, and then they have to kind of like in class kind of counter teach what comes home in the books. So I don't necessarily have a plan in that. I know that as you go through parenting, your ideas mature. I mean, I can remember being like a first-time mom and like, oh my gosh, it touched the ground, I have to sterilize it. And the second time around, I'm like, it's fine, it won't kill him. Right. So there's a maturing process with that. And then there's also but also knowing who you are as a mom or a dad and being comfortable with that and being willing to stand up for that and say, just because you're the school system doesn't mean you're right.
Yeah, I won't even give them that option. Not until they're at a high school age, where I think that the social elements not kind of outweighs, and my ability to teach certain subjects kind of goes away. I can't teach college level writing. I can't teach chemistry, right?
And there are social, there are negatives that happen in school which are good teaching moments. So there are bad things that happen in school, and you think, I want to protect my child from this, and then you think, but I would rather they learn how to deal with a bully when they're 10 and willing to listen to me than when they're 17 and are like, F you, Mom, you don't know anything. So
Right.
There's some positives to them dealing with these kinds of things that are beyond your control at an earlier age.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. But I guess what I mean by plan is a general idea of how to move forward. You know, you're not micro-planning every second of every day, right? And looking for reasons to overreact to what your child is doing. But having a plan and trying your best to execute that plan is better than not having one at all. You know, even in the world of corporate finance, budgets have cost overruns. I mean, there's constant screw-ups to the plan. That doesn't mean, and then you react to the plan, right? But you have to have one. Not having one is probably the worst thing you can do.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be a formal thing. I mean, kind of putting these different thoughts together, it's important. Identify the values that you want your kids to have and your family to have, and be active in instilling those values. And I mean that if that's your plan, you know, I think what you're all getting at is you've got to have intentionality about the direction your kids' lives take and what is shaping them. You've got to be intentional in being involved, and you have to be thoughtful about it, and you do have to look ahead to what they will encounter. I mean, and whether you have a detailed plan about that, but it's all kind of the same idea of just knowing what your values are and being intentional about getting it there.
Yeah, and I think that plan can range from being totally anal about it, writing it down, to the other extent is it kind of being sort of subconscious, whereas you're just trying to instill your values on your child, so to speak.
Right, and maybe that's what I mean. Like, for example, when he's 10 years old, and, you know, or he or she is 10 years old, and you take him to maybe a doctor friend, like a take your kid to work day, but you take him to a doctor, and the doctor sort of, you know, has him shadow all day, and then that kid internalizes what happens at a doctor's office all day, and they might suddenly want to become a doctor as a result, right? But the one thing they take away from that experience is that sort of professionalism doesn't include negative behavior. Right, and if you instill that often enough, doctors, attorneys, you know, whatever it is, you know, systems engineers, and any sort of place where they see professionalism and a high work ethic, the earlier you instill that in them, eventually it'll take off. You know, that's my hope anyway.
Yeah, you can over-instill a certain amount of professionalism in a child because they're still children.
Right, you don't want them to be Alex P. Keaton, but...
Right, but let's let them be children for as long as they can be children. Let's let them enjoy that. But how many of us, you know, the first time our first child, we took him to the grocery store and they pitched a fit in the cereal aisle? How many of us seriously had a plan for that? None of us. Not a single one of us, okay? I stuck to my guns the first time my daughter did this because the rule was... We had a little rule: if you're good in the grocery store, you get a treat, which was a 25-cent bag of chips and a little mini Yoo-hoo. That was her treat if she was good all the way through. That was her reward. We'd get all the way to the checkout line because I was prepared. I stuck to my guns, and it cut me like a knife. You know, and I walked out of the cereal aisle. You're staying here. You want to roll on the floor? Stay right there. I'm gone. She comes following me. Of course, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. Get to the checkout line, and she's eyeballing with these big brown puppy dog eyes. She's looking at the chips, and she's looking over at the Yoo-hoo, and she's got this sad face on, and the cashier was like, "Why are you so sad?" And I looked at her, I said, "Well, tell her why you're upset, because I can't have chips or a Yoo-hoo." And she goes, "Oh, you need to let that little girl have a chips and a Yoo-hoo." And I said, and I looked at my daughter, and she's 3. I said, "Tell her why you can't have chips and a Yoo-hoo." And she looks down the floor. She goes, "Because I was bad." I didn't quite hear you. What did you say? She looks up a little more. "Because I was bad, I pitched a fit." I said, "Were you supposed to pitch a fit?" "No." what was the rule? If you pitch a fit, could you get a yoo-hoo and the chips? She goes, no. Are you going to do it again? No. But you still don't get chips. And the next day, different story. We walked down the cereal aisle very nicely. But I was not prepared for that. I just kind of went with it. It wasn't a prepared plan. It was just my kind of gut instinct on I need to instill the rules and the guidelines.
Yeah,
and these are the consequences if you break the rules.
That was one of the things that we shared in a chat earlier, was that behaviors don't change without consequences, and that is something that's critical for my kids. We are really, really clear about not fostering bad behaviors, and there are very tangible penalties for those bad behaviors. Anywhere from, depending on what the behavior is, anywhere from nothing all the way up to, at an absolute worst, a spanking. But it's just, if you don't, and all the time I see this negotiation and the putting of the parent relationship aside for some sort of friendship, and that's not any of our jobs to be friends. It is our jobs to be parents and to raise our kids.
Well,
see, I would be careful with that to some degree.
It is a certain.
Why? Wow. That sounded so perfect. Why would you be careful with that?
There is, now I'm going to play devil's advocate for this. Okay, there is a certain amount of, and not so much friendship that you have to establish with your child, but you have to be a confidant for your child. Okay.
Yes.
And
especially now.
And you have to be a trusted confidant.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to be willing to, they need to come with you with something so dear to them that just they won't tell anybody else. They got to have somebody they can talk to and they can absolutely trust, and you got to be it. Now, if you go over the one end of the spectrum, then you kind of lose that trust. Okay. Going back to the dirty joke that I told my mom, she lost my trust.
Right.
Okay. And I could never talk to her about certain things after that point.
Man, that's such a different perspective.
But I've also seen friends where they take it to the other extreme, where they're such good friends with their kids, they have zero discipline.
Well, and that seems to be the vast majority of parents I see. The vast 90-some% majority is that they think that their children are peers.
Right.
And they instill that in them, and they feel like they can have discussions with their children when they really need to be just telling them what to do.
Right. And I think it was Jim. Was it Jim that was talking about the spanking with the different levels of punishment? Was that you, Jim?
Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, let's think about real life. Once they're adults, okay, they should be absolutely afraid to break the law. Okay, I don't want my child I would rather my child, in some cases, be afraid of the consequences. Definitely afraid of the consequences than to wind up in jail.
Right.
As an adult. That's just my perspective, and I am an advocate. I'm not an advocate for child abuse, but I am an advocate for whipping out a switch when it's needed.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely.
And I'm totally against it.
Yeah, and then some people are, and it's this is a huge argument that we could have, but
I mean, especially
as a parent, I am more afraid of them not being afraid of going to jail later in life or having to face those serious consequences than I am of child services coming to my door.
I'm more concerned about just teaching about respecting. So, and this is honestly kind of where I come back to if my son comes to me before 13 and says, I want a Facebook account, and I say, well, the terms of service are that you have to be 13. So it's about respecting, these are the rules and boundaries. And so I will allow my children to have a negotiation with me as long as there's a respect involved. Because I think negotiating is an extremely important skill as an adult, knowing when you can ask for more and when you need to step back. And as long as it's presented to me in a respectful manner, then we can have a conversation about it. it's time to go to bed. Okay, Mom, let's talk about this. Here's why I maybe don't want to go to bed. And if they can give me like a good reason for it, more power to them, because being able to talk your way through life is extremely important.
Right.
There's also a time for them, and I'm just using that as like a particular example, but there's also, it's time to go to bed, and I'm your mother, and they know this is my key word with them. This is non-negotiable.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to follow up with you on was, I think one of the things that helps in this conversation is understanding the context of age. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and therefore that confidant aspect that you mentioned is I think would be more applicable as the children age. At a younger age, it's much more about consequences, right and wrong policies, and that sort of stuff.
Right.
But,
I mean, once you reach 3 years old, or 3 or 4 years old, they should know between right and wrong. You should have instilled that in. And I'm going to go back to the spanking thing. Here's the thing. My daughter broke the boundary like one time, came real close. And I went outside and I picked this switch and I told her, I said, I'm going to spank you with this if you do that again. You're done. This is the final rule. Laid the switch up on the top of the refrigerator. I never had to use it on her. Mm-hmm. I had to reach for it one time. Mm-hmm. But she was so afraid of the consequences that she wouldn't do and I forget what it was that she did, that she would stop. So it's not actually, you don't actually have to inflict that
every time
punishment. They just have to know that you're serious and you will do it if they push your buttons.
Yeah, that it's available. And the other consequences that are available to you are like, again, you're keeping these kids active in sports and whatever. I used to be active in fencing, and these children, when they go around the country and fence at all these tournaments, there's thousands of dollars a year are being spent on travel alone, right? Mm-hmm. And so they meet these friends all around the country. Let's say they have, something terrible happens. They have unprotected sex and they get an STD or something, right? You do not continue to reward that child with all that money being spent on fencing. That crap stops. That's all done. You make sure that all that's, it's clear that everything that they considered a right was really a privilege.
Well,
what if that fencing was something they were really skilled at and was a way for them to go to college and get scholarship money? So you don't necessarily want to take away that thing that might be distracting them from the things that they shouldn't be doing, and you don't necessarily want to take away that thing that could perhaps give them something for the future. So maybe you, as a parent, try to find something else to consequence them with.
I'm going to bounce off of Stephanie just a little bit here. In that wild scenario that you just played out,
right?
So they went on a fencing trip and they had unprotected sex. They got an STD. That's actually not the case where the fencing was the problem.
Right.
Okay. That's an instance where this is a life lesson and something this child really needs to learn about. That's when you sit down and you have a heart-to-heart, kind of a confidant discussion.
Right.
About unprotected sex, and you just lay it out on the line. You don't need to do this. And if you're going to have sex,
right,
because you're 16 and you're just a hussy, and you're my child, but you're still a hussy, go buy condoms and make the son of a bitch that you're going to have sex with wear a condom. Okay. That's when you sit down and you have that serious discussion, because I'm telling you guys.
This can all relate back to
nobody
technology.
wants to hear this, but if your child wants to have sex at 16, a lot of sex at 16, they're going to have it. The best thing that you can do is to throw out that mom and dad mentality and go, just do it safely.
Well, and this is also where you get to say, but I'm not letting you go next month to that fencing trip because there's a consequence for what you've done. So as a further reminder, hey, I know you're 16. I know you needed national points. You're still probably going to make it anyway, but you know what? You're just not. I'm not spending another $1,500 for you to get laid. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen.
No, I would just go with them. I'd be like, we'll be going together.
Now, here's the thing, though. Here's going back to that. You're spending the money that they they're getting this world-class attention or whatever you're talking about, maybe a potential scholarship.
Right.
You don't want to impede that. Okay.
You don't want to impede it, but then again, you know, when you're 15,
you don't want to endorse the negative activity. So yeah, like
Right.
Stephanie said, I would be the chaperone. Oh no! I would not just be a chaperone. I would be your roommate. That's
Right.
what I will be.
Well, but then again,
Okay.
you know, when you're competing in these things and you're 15, for example, or 16, and this happens, you've got plenty of time to impress all the people that you need to in order to get a scholarship to Ohio State or whatever the big fencing colleges are. So
Right,
that's not really an issue. But,
Right, but-
what is an issue is you don't want to reward them and say, hey, I'm going to continue to be this wonderful parent providing you all this crap when you do something not done.
I don't think the parent being there would be the reward. I think they would be like, oh gosh, my mom's going to be there. I'm not going to have any fun.
No, the punishment in my mind is that they stay in that room and they continue studying for a month and they rue over the fact that they did something really stupid so that the following month I can trust them to not do something stupid again.
Okay, but you
Because
can't.
it will get worse the
no,
next
no.
time.
Wait a minute. Here's what's going to backfire on you. Let me just throw this out there.
Right.
When you take a child that has done something like that, a teenager, has done something, and you lock him in a room and you shut him in, and blah, blah, you're never going to talk to another boy for a month. As soon as that month is up, how many boys is she going to talk to? I see some women nodding in that room.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, hopefully I have some
time out. Here's the thing. And Stephanie had it just about right. The way you handle it is you are grounded from so many things. Like, give me your cell phone. You're off the computer. You can't watch TV. No television. No cell phone. Nothing. But you can still go on this trip. But I'm your chaperone and roommate. And I'm going to be your roommate and chaperone no matter how much more it costs me. I'm going to let you have this experience and let you further yourself, but under my close, watchful eye.
Yeah, the kids need to know, and this is, I mean, I'm just going to talk from mistakes. I mean, I was the king of just consequences that just didn't line up with stuff, or consequences that weren't productive in the long run, and just even in recent years had some good friends kind of help me get back on track. And I guess I'm just agreeing with just being careful. You can't just blanket put the consequences out there like that. Well, you know, and they have to be thought out. Like Joe was saying, your kids have to know that regardless what they do, that you're still working for their good in the long run.
Right.
And working, yeah, you want there to be consequences, but you want to, and this is a fairly new perspective for me. So, but I'm even seeing the like positive results in it with my kids already.
Well, you just need to make them aware in advance, right? And instill in them, hey, look, if you have unprotected sex while you're on these fencing trips, I promise you won't be going on many of them in the future. So, by the way,
I think it's hard for them to. I think it's hard. You have to acknowledge that, like, and I go through this with my son with their tally system at school. Is if they get 10 tallies, they had like their field trip taken away. Well, at the time that he's getting a tally, they're like, you have a tally. He's like, okay, I have a tally. But it doesn't compute. And I think, you can tell them all day long, if you do this while you're away, this is going to happen. And I think sometimes when they're in that moment, it's still, that's why they're kids. Like, it's still really hard for them. And some kids you can trust and they will make the right decisions. And some kids require a little closer supervision. But you shouldn't take away, like, that thing that they really love and that thing that they're identifying with and perhaps is giving them alternative adults to talk to. And like, what I watched my mom go through was that, she was dealing with my cousin's child, and she was like, you're doing X, Y, Z, I'm just taking everything away because your friend got a dirty pic sent to her, you can't have your phone anymore. Because she just didn't,
Or you can't be friends with that person.
And I just watched, and my mom did nothing wrong. She just was dealing with, A, she didn't have the same foundation with my cousin's child that she'd had with my sister and I because she didn't get her until later in life. And B, she was dealing with technology she didn't understand. So, and I just watched this kind of push and pull and this rebellion that resulted that was far different than, I mean, my sister and I both rebelled. I mean, we were normal teenagers. But it wasn't to the same level, and there was no reaching through to her, and there was just no...
Well, and here's the thing. I think rebellion is a natural part of children growing up, and if you don't allow children to rebel, they will fail as adults in my mind. But I think if you can focus the rebellion in ways that are less financially and legally painful for you as parents, right. It's better. You know,
the rebellion will happen.
Yeah, it absolutely will happen.
Once they hit puberty, rebellion happens. It happens to every parent. Period. I don't care how lax you are as a parent. Rebellion happens. They were going to push those boundaries until you put that foot down and bam.
Hey,
and
Mike.
And they're still going to try to rebel.
Hey,
and
Mike.
the more firmly you do it, the better off you are. That's
well, actually, the more fairly that you do it, and this is one thing that I've learned.
But what does fair mean, though?
Both as being a step-parent and a parent. Okay. So.
Hey, Mike. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, Joe, what does fair mean?
It's kind of going back to the same thing what we were talking about earlier, where as the punishment fits the crime.
Right.
Kind of thing. Okay. You put it down fairly, okay, and you're going back to the girl who got pregnant or got an STD and a fencing thing. You've got to say, all right, here's your punishment, and you're being punished, and you've got to understand you're being punished. And I'm sorry, if it happened to my daughter, it'd be a year with all that stuff. And I would still be tagging right behind her at every fencing thing, and she would be my roommate, and for a year. I mean, she'd be so embarrassed for a year. But I would also be very careful not to make it so awkward that she wanted to give up that passion that she had for that sport.
Yeah, but Joe, now you're also subjecting yourself to being the father of the huzzy daughter who got an STD, and everybody's going to be looking at you for that year.
Yeah, well, so what? See, here's the thing.
I've maybe not done something right as a parent, and they can judge me all they want. I'm going to do what's right for my kid.
Right. So here's the thing. that I see most parents make the mistake is they live in this I'm a parent bubble, and I can only be this way. I can only be perceived this way.
Right.
And you know what? If your child makes a mistake, you think you're going to be judged as a parent. You know what?
And you will be. But that's
exactly.
I know this is on air, but screw it. Okay.
Yeah.
The thing is, you've got to take care of your kid the way you need to take care of your kid.
I have, going back to the grocery store example, I have a friend who's recently kind of had a baby, and she's very uncomfortable with being a parent, and she's very concerned about like going out somewhere with her child and her baby crying and people looking at her funny. And I said, you know, you're going to be really uncomfortable with this until you experience it, and then you're going to find out that your kid's going to throw some sort of major fit or be screaming, and you won't care what anyone else is thinking about you at that moment. All you're going to be concerned about is handling your child. And I have had my kids screaming through a mall, and I've got, you know, a child carrier in one hand and a 4-year-old who's screaming and fighting at the top of his lungs, and I'm just marching down the mall because it's pouring rain. I'm like, I'm going to get to my car, we're going to leave, and I don't care what anyone else thinks about me. I'm not going to just stop to quiet him down because I'm going to do what's right for my family. And on my way out, I had like 4 different people look at me and go, God bless you. You know, like
I wish there were more parents like that too, because I work in a mall and I've had kids destroy things in my store.
The whole knee-jerk reaction to the anti-spanking timeout thing that went on. What it was in the middle '90s, I think was when that first started.
Yeah, the Dr. Spock nightmare.
Yeah.
I have
here's the thing.
Had a negative reaction when I disciplined my children in public. I have only had people react positively.
I never have either. And the only negative reactions that have ever and I will still give them if somebody's abusing a child. I mean, really going over the top with it. If they pop their bottom in a grocery store, thank you, man. You are awesome.
It's perfectly
legal. it's within your rights as a parent. It should be within your rights as a parent to. I know that Fiona is against it, spanking or whatever, but
I just say discipline in general. But
Discipline.
I think
Right.
Jim was going to try to say something here.
sorry, go ahead. Jim.
Yeah, there are very few people that I have shared this with outside of this group. I have a 7-year-old who is a typical child, and I also have a 5-year-old who has Down syndrome. And I know everybody's going to fall out of their chair when I say this. I have spanked my special needs son. And do I do it frequently? God, no. I do it as infrequently as I can probably count on one hand the number of times that has happened. But for us, when there is a situation that needs immediate and memorable consequences, sometimes that is appropriate. I don't want everybody to leave this thinking, oh, Jim is the spanker. Jim's not the spanker. It's a court of last resort. But there are times when you need that immediacy and impact of the moment so that something never happens again. Like running out into the street.
My kids used to say when we were in the shopping shopping and they see other kids throwing a fit, they would say, that kid needs a spanking. And I mean, it wasn't. I mean, you can do it wrong and you can do it abusive and hurtful, but you can also do it like you're saying. You can do it in love and productive. But that, I guess, that's a whole different tactic. No fucking discipline.
One thing I wanted to go back and say, Mike, was one of the themes or the threads that runs through all of these conversations is teaching good decision making. We have an endless opportunity to teach our kids good decision making. I ask my kids, and my kids ask me things every day, and in the context of all of those conversations is an opportunity to share knowledge of how to make a good decision, and that's critical.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And that's one of the things, too, that a lot of parents forget, or some parents forget. When you discipline your child, you also have to tell them why, and you have to make them tell you why they're in trouble. You have to get them to understand what they did wrong and why it was wrong. Yes, you got to get them to own up to it. Now, when we go back to disciplining, you see this cap I got on? It's a light cap, right? There's no metal knuckle on the back. And my two nieces are 2 years old. They just turned 2, and they're going through the terrible twos in a wild fashion. And it took me one time to take my cap and just smack that bottom, just whip it one time. I mean, it didn't hurt. I mean, come on, I can hit my hand harder. It gets their attention, but it hurts their feelings more than it did anything at that age. and that's a very important age to do it at. All right, you got to get that little soft love tap and just get their attention and hurt their feelings. Right?
Now I've been criticized.
And now I can actually do this and look at them and give them a look, like Lori said, just give them a look and lift my half up and they're like, oh no, we're not supposed to be doing that.
Wendy, what were you going to say?
I get it. Sorry, go
ahead. Have been criticized by my daughter. She's only 3, and she takes dance classes. It's her first year in her dance class, and at the end of class, because they're so young, they give them little stamps on their hands for a good job. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some nights where she will run around the room, crawl on the floor, look at herself in the mirror, do everything but stand on the line and do your dances. So I went into the room, and her teacher, she taught me, that's how long I've known this woman, and I told her, don't give her any stamps tonight. Make her sit there and watch all of her friends get their stamps, but do not let her have them, because that's just going to instill that what she just did for this last hour was okay, and I don't want her to have that reinforcement. So I went in the room and I sat on the floor next to her and I said, we're going to watch everybody get their stamps first. And she's like, okay, Mommy. And then when it came where she was the last child in the room, she's like, okay, well, do I get mine? And I said, nope, Miss Callie's going to put the stamps away. You don't get yours this week because you didn't have a good week. You didn't participate. Well, all the other moms were like, that's so mean. Why would you do that? That's so mean. And it's you know, where do you draw the line between being too strict but being being firm? I prefer being too strict and having that structure and that firm firm support, so that way later on in life I'm not trying and it might problem later on in life.
Yeah.
And it also didn't help that night as we're walking out, she, runs into, you're holding your child's hand, she breaks free from your hand, runs into a dark parking lot with cars that can't see her, so I snatch her back and I'm like shaking her and, don't run out in the park, one of those moments as a parent where it's like you gotta rein it in because you just want to wring their little neck.
I had 2 incidences with my daughter when she was I guess about 2.
Hold on. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast session so that we can keep talking and we can continue with everything, but I'm just going to end the recording because it's been a little more than an hour and I think that's long enough for a YouTube video. So let's just hit the end broadcast and then you can continue.
Okay.